When it comes to the history of the really early church and the disciples of Jesus, there are a few names that stick out, getting more of a mention in Scripture or in the annals of history. Thomas, John, Matthew, James, Peter, and that Judas are most likely the first disciples you'd think of if you were asked to write a list of all of Jesus' followers. But often the less popular ones have got interesting stories to tell as well, as this series has shown us. Among the 12, Jesus called 2 sets of brothers. The sons of thunder, James and John, we've looked at before, but the other pair were Peter and his older brother, Andrew, who we're talking about today. Along with his brother Peter, Andrew was one of the first to be called by Jesus on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. The Synoptic Gospels all say that they were both called when Jesus visited them during work hours while they were fishing. The Gospel of John, being the standout as always, paints a slightly different tale. In his telling of the tale, Andrew was originally a follower of John the Baptist, and when he pointed out that Jesus was the Messiah, Andrew and his colleague went up to him and spent some time listening to some of his teaching. It wasn't long before he realised that Jesus was in fact the real deal, so he went to find his brother Peter and introduced him to Jesus. The two brothers were present at some of Jesus' biggest hits. Andrew introduced the boy with the loaves and the fishes. He asked Jesus a couple of questions, and naturally, he was there at both the Last Supper and at Pentecost. But like many of his peers, after all the big events, he dropped off the radar. So what happened to him? Well, let's go grab a drink and find out. As with all the apostles, Andrew's tale is told through the lenses of traditions, so of course it's all a bit fuzzy. Eusebius, that church chronicler extraordinaire, mentions that the theologian Origen said that Andrew had set his sights on the east, and by east, we are talking way east. Much later, in a history known as Nestor's Chronicle, Andrew is said to have preached his way all the way to the city of Kiev, and possibly even as far as Novgorod. Other church historians give us a bit more depth to his journeys, and it seems that like his peers, he was not content to stay in one place. While his journeys to the east were well known of, he had also had some dealings in Istanbul, which was once Constantinople, which was once Byzantium, where, like his brother Peter with Rome, he was involved in the founding of the church there, and in this case, setting it up with a bishop after he'd gone. As always, Andrew gets a mention in the Golden Legend, where he gets up to the usual apostle stuff: miracles and annoying local rulers. The first miracle in the legend involves his fellow apostle Matthew. As is usually the case, Matthew's preaching had upset some people, so much so that they took out his eyes and threw him in prison. Andrew, meanwhile, had been told by an angel to head for a place on the coast where Matthew was headed. Andrew arrived and discovered his fellow apostle in a very sorry state, but the prison was wide open. Andrew wept for his friend and prayed for him, and upon hearing his pleas, God gave Matthew his eyes back. A very grateful Matthew got out of Dodge, while Andrew stayed behind. The locals were not too pleased about their prisoner escaping, and decided Andrew would make a fine replacement for him. He prayed for his captors, though, and converted them all. This, of course, is just one of a few bonkers things that he got up to, some of which involved raising the dead, healing people of their afflictions, casting out demons, and, in one case, helping out a fellow Christian in a legal case by summoning earthquakes and thunder. Andrew, like Peter, also has some writing associated with him, although the Acts of Andrew never made the cut into biblical canon, and for a while it was considered a Gnostic work before we really discovered what the Gnostics' deal really was. But one thing in this document is mentioned that is readily associated with Andrew, and that is the manner in which he died. Andrew met his end in 60 CE, during the reign of the Roman Emperor Nero. He was set to be crucified, but like his brother Peter, he refused to die in the same manner as his Lord. He was crucified on an X-shaped cross, and was bound to it, not nailed. This X shape would be known as the St Andrew's Cross, of which the most prominent use of nowadays is in the flag of Scotland, since he's their patron saint, and he's celebrated on November the 30th, the day of his martyrdom. So, while his little brother got all the attention, Andrew still set off to do the same as the rest of the 12. Spread the message of Jesus as far and as wide as possible. We've got one last apostle to look at before we start looking at who carried the apostles' torches after them, and that is Philip. So, do all the likey, sharey, subscribey things if you'd like to see more, but until we meet again, go grab yourself a drink and keep asking questions.